My name is Azarel, and thank you for coming today. So I just wanted to very briefly, for this session, I just want to introduce a little bit of Japan and a little bit of the values that Japan is based transport of, because it's very different from Sweden, from the rest of Europe. And I will bring some examples from what we do in Japan in Mirai Share, which I briefly will introduce, but with a special focus on finance sustainability and aging society, which are, I think, there are two challenges that we both share between Sweden and Japan. So about Mirai Share. So Mirai Share is a very particular company. We are the largest on-demand ride pooling solution here in Japan. And we are very different from many other companies in that we were bred at the university in the city of Hakodate. Hakodate is actually a medium city in Japan. It's more like a regional capital. It's not really big. And it's in the north, in the island of Hokkaido, where it is extremely cold. It is where it's an island that receives the snow from Siberia. So winters are very harsh. And they struggle now, the city is struggling now because even though historically it was very important economically for the region, nowadays the population is aging, and there's the population issues, as you can see on the left side, and so transportation is under struggle. So that was already 20 years ago. It's still ongoing, and 20 years ago is where our journey starts. So Mirai Share was founded by professors and researchers at different universities and research institutes, such as the University of Tokyo, the ICE, the Future University Hakodate, that in 2011, people created an NPO so they could test these new technologies on a real site. They wanted to see what's the social value of these on-demand solutions and walk the talk. And over the years, in 2016, they merged with a software development company, and they created Mirai Share, which is now a acquired company. As I say, the fact that most of our members comes from the research, from the university, from that social value has impacted our business in that we really focus into that. And it's a very different way to approach the business case in Japan as well, because we need to work with public stakeholders from this perspective. Very briefly, I don't want to go much into details because our main product is our SaaS platform. So it's a ride-pooling solution. From other webinars you have done here, you more or less know how it works. So you have a supply of vehicles and a demand of passengers, and you basically pull them together, which is a typical DRT service. But there are also like different business cases such as paratransit, urban solutions, and so on. So our solution was, again, inbred at the university. So it's very well done, but there is not much to say regarding that. I don't want to go much into that. Instead, I want to focus on something else. In our case, where our main technology is there, we use it for developing the new solutions in rural areas, in cities, and so on. But what we do focus, which is the main point in Japan, is the integrated service design. In Japan, the co-creation of new services, DRT services, is very different from Europe, for instance, because again, public transport in Japan is fully private. So it's all between private agreements with little public integration first. So we need to see how we can cooperate together to develop these solutions. And the real value for us is not the technology, which is just a mean, but the final end goals that we achieve through this cooperation. So to understand in general how Japan works when designing co-creation, and for the case of Mirai Share, I would like to introduce very briefly 5 values that are key to the Japanese culture, especially the Japanese business culture, and how through these values we can navigate to achieve that financial sustainability on the looming aging society. So we'll talk about omotenashi, kawaii, work, kaizen, mirai. I know it may be challenging. I know some of you may have heard of this, but I would like to explain how do we actually implement these values and how they shape our thinking. The first one is omotenashi. Omotenashi is the famous Japanese hospitality, and it's based on always do things before they are expected. So we show care about the user, about the customer. And this, in our case, we translate as an integration of inclusiveness design, because, for example, we notice for most DRT services, we tend to our main target, our main audience are elderly people, people who are disabled or with disabilities, that they have different, they are hard to reach because they are not digitalized. So we notice that there are many, many ways we can achieve them beyond technology. And for instance, if we come from the most traditional way to do things, we have the typical call center. Call center is very important because to have a human that can understand what a person needs and can modify bookings, can give recommendations is very important. Although we see a transition towards the elimination of call centers because they're also expensive. We believe that human touch is very important, but we also believe call center is not the only way you can do it. And from that, just I will explain 1 second. We also do e-mobility ports for mobility hubs. For example, this one on the right, you can see it's from rural Japan, from the city, from the town of Odaicha, where I went there, and we placed this totem in a kind of like a roadside station within the town with shared bicycles, with bus stations, but also with toilets, very important, by the way, free Wi-Fi, a restaurant, a resting area, and we wanted to see if actually this could be easier interface to use for example, the elderly. Plot two is an easy, whatever works for the elderly also works for most people. But then we also go to the extra mile. We think there are more solutions we need to think about how to reach out this population. And for example, we have developed voice solutions through smartphones, but not through apps, to call or book vehicles, for example, using Alexa or using your call system. You can just make a kind of chatbots, but also we have integrated our service into Line. So Line is the equivalent of WhatsApp, Telegram in Japan. So for elderly people, it's quite convenient because everyone here has a Line. Everyone in Europe has a WhatsApp, most of them. So it's much easier to book their appointments through that. But for example, we also did a TV-based booking. So if you know what is teletext, if you are probably older than me, you know what it is. If you're younger, you may know. But we found that for elderly people, it might be very useful to be able to book their appointments through using the remote control. So there is a time we did this, and they can use that for also deliveries. So we always need to explore the different ways to reach our main target population. And as you can see, I am not talking about apps because apps is always the last resource. Then is the concept of kawaii, which is heavily related to the omotenashi. Kawaii, in brief explanation, is just the cute aesthetics, but it goes beyond that. Cuteness sells, and cuteness is often forgotten in developed countries. But if you come to South Asia or East Asia, you see cuteness is everywhere. And that design, we call it kawaii, is a feeling, is an attitude. Kawaii creates positive feelings, and that's a good thing. But more importantly, everyone understands kawaii. It's a very powerful tool to appeal to everyone. And kawaii can range from design. For example, if you see here on the right side, these are like 2 posters that in one of our services that is run in the city of Maebashi, hence the Maemas name. The city uses to attract attention. You can see the use of cute references like cats. Everyone loves cats, I believe. You can see how we try to make appealing to the service, but also that shows cares. It shows that we do care about our service. We keep them clean. We keep them attractive. And one thing that, for example, we normally do here in Japan is to try to create a brand, some kind of like a branding for the service, and that comes from the vehicles, from the bus stops. It comes from the basic level. This is extremely important for operational reasons. It can be used to recognize different vehicles in a ride-pooling services. But also, if you see this, if you don't know about these services and you see them through your streets, it will stand out, and you will probably question yourself, what is this? You will search for it, and therefore you will be more likely to use it. And again, it's much more nicely. And a common issue we hear is that this is not possible somewhere else because it requires money. Well, there are also ways to involve the community with much more or less cost. For example, this service here in Seto City, the vehicle was actually painted by the local kids. And that was a very incredible experience because these kids, they were invited to inaugurate the service. And these kids, when they came to the venue, they didn't come alone. They come with their grandparents, with their fathers, with their parents. And it turns out that those grandparents were the main target of this service. So now you have elderly people who want to try this because their grandsons, they just made the pictures. So again, it's a good way to make an appealing. It's a good way to bring the people into the service. And again, it's much nicer and it's easier to do things in a kawaii way than just in a boring way. The next one, it's very hard to explain, is the concept of wa. But wa, it can be translated as harmony. It's much more than that. It's intrinsic to the Japanese culture. And in Japan, as I say, it's transportation is a private matter. So we need to create a harmonious environment between private stakeholders. That means that it's a operative reason. So as you probably know, in Europe often, and in Japan as well, when you run new services, especially shared mobility services, there are conflict of interest. For example, if you write a ride-pooling service in a new area, the taxi companies there, they may complain, or the bus companies, they may complain because they believe they are going to cannibalize their service, which is a fair statement. So we always need to look for these cross-sector collaborations and all the local stakeholders to create these services. For instance, often in rural areas, what we do is that for the vehicles, we approach the taxi companies or the bus companies, and we ask them to source them. And it's very interesting for them because taxi companies in rural areas, they are struggling now because they have they have less demand as population decrease. So for them to have some sort of a stable revenue from this service, it can be very powerful. And normally when they do that, they also put their own conditions, such as, for example, not to run services during the night or the evening, because that's when they make more of the cash. So it makes sense for us to use this trade-off to bring them in and over time to work with them. For example, there was one city that they make a rule that they say that to book these services, you need to book them at least 30 minutes in advance. Most of those services are on real time, so you can just put them straight away. But we did that, and after 1 year, they decided to just scrap this rule because they saw there was a value. And we also explore, which is very important, again, for financial sustainability, to try to involve different services. We are the only service in Japan that has mixed passengers and deliveries. For example, there's a town called Kumenan, where the shops, it's 5,000 people, 3,000 people, it's a very small one. The shops over there is mostly elderly people, and they struggle for sorting the logistics because for them to ask someone to bring some produce or to deliver, it's very expensive because there's no people. So we thought about, well, we are doing a DRT service there for people. So what if we allocate a small place into the trunk of the vehicle, and we can actually carry delivery service, small packets. And well, is for once a good way to bring some extra revenues, but also it's a good way to support the local community because now people don't need to go into the center to go to this specific shop if they don't want to, or the elderly people who are hosting the shop, they don't need to find someone else to deliver them. They can actually use their ongoing service, which is very successful. Most of these deliveries, by the way, in these towns, they are actually done to the primary schools because parents, they order food for the lunch, like a lunchbox, and they deliver through that. So it's quite successful. Other things we have done is, for example, integrating private stakeholders that they go beyond transport, like the case of on my right. You can see the Sapporo drugstore. So this is one of our partners in the town of Esashi in the north of Japan, next to Hakodate, by the way. And they decide that this drugstore is struggling because they are having less and less clients because, well, their customers are basically dying. And their main goods are actually hygiene products that they might be interesting for the elderly people. So they thought maybe they have accessibility problems in this snowing country. So during winter, we run 3 pilots. This is the result of one of them, where this private company will partially fund a DRT service on the belief that this will increase their sales. Now, the DRT service will not be only for this specific drugstore. It will be available to everybody anywhere in the town. So you can go from your house to the city hall, for instance, or wherever you want. You don't need to come here. But they want to say if as a side effect, they could actually increase the sales. To do so, they also allow the usage of like the point card. So they have a very cute point card that I didn't attach here. So they could track the user behavior and sales so that we could see if this was successful. And in the first trial, in the first month, as you can see here, we tracked the purchasing behavior of the people for 1 year. And we saw like the people were able to go to the shop like 4 times more. And the end sales of the whole budget of people who went there was 3 times more because they were able to go there. So since then, this drugstore has been quite supportive, financially supportive of this system, which is already running in this town. So this is another way to bring extra revenues and reduce the burden of the public sector. And another related to this is the concept of Kaizen. Kaizen is the continuous improvement. We believe that perfection is the enemy of the good. So we always prefer to start small, a small pilot, for example, and then start to add in layers. Sometimes it could be, for example, the delivery of the parcels, as I say. When we start that project, it took like a few months until we decide to go into that. Sometimes it could be to add different economic agencies, like the drugstore, for instance. But it's very important to try not to do things great from the beginning and rather learning. And learning is important because we see that, for example, when we start doing a pilot, we start to see that the needs of the people there are not, for example, a digital payment system or smartphone payment systems, but perhaps other things such as a better booking system or a accessibility to certain areas. So it's very important to be modular and it's very important to be flexible. And this is the concept also of Kaizen. We also, in my experience, we need normally 1 to 3 months, depends on the size, to fully calibrate a area. So we also believe that the fact that you can start with a pilot is important, but we always need to have a roadmap for the implementation of the project in the long term. And it's perfectly fine to be flexible. It's perfectly fine to change that. There's no issue. It's how it should be. But again, try not to make it rigid. Try to make something small and then make it bigger and bigger. And the final value is Mirai, which is literally our name, Mirai Share. Mirai means future. And we believe we need to share the smart future. We believe that on-demand services are important as a replacement of existing services in certain cases, but they also open new possibilities. They open new possibilities for businesses, but also for the social values. So we are piloting different innovative pilots where we, for example, we are testing the delivery of drones in time with road transport for passengers, or we are one of the partners of the railway companies here in Japan to develop mass applications for rural Japan. For example, to bring high purchasing power tourists to the rural areas so they can cross-fund the local services. And I think that's very important. The fact that we need to find the reason behind reason that we need to find what's the role of these systems into the future, and not just be a replacement or a digital upgrade of the system ones. And again, it's important to walk the talk. So if you want to know more about this or what we have done, I think the best way you can achieve this, you can get this information, not only from Mirai Share, from the rest of companies in Japan, is through the data available from the Smart Mobility Challenge. So I have prepared a database with all the projects publicly funded by the central government, not the local ones, just the central government, which you can see in this QR code, with a yearly report every year where you can see the results. I think it's a great opportunity if you want to learn more, even though most of the information is in Japanese, you can use Google Translate. But if you use it, you can actually see results, financial results, you can see the passengers, you can see what we can learn. And I think a great thing of the Japanese government in how they deal with this is that every year they try to continue the existing projects by enlarging them, by learning something new. So you can see how they benchmark these solutions. You can see how we all learn together. And I think that's the whole amazing experience in Japan when it comes about co-creation. So I hope you like the presentation, and I also hope you have many questions about these different values. Again, my goal for this presentation is that you walk away with a different mindset on how we approach the industry. You can see it's less about transport, more about mobility, including land use, economic activities. So I look forward for your questions, and of course, if you want to reach out, feel free to reach me out on LinkedIn or through my email. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Azarel. Very interesting about learning about Japanese culture and also solutions on ride pooling. So please feel free, everybody in the webinar here now, to raise your hand or write some question in the chat, and we will try to answer that here now in a couple of minutes here now before we get on with further information. Azarel, how many cities do you have this service in? But you haven't the mic on.
Sorry. So according to the famous Lucas report on on-demand ride pooling, we are the third ones in growth in the world, and we are the fourth one by number. Sorry, the third ones in number of projects. We have operating about I think 100 areas at the moment. We are operating 40, I think around 40. And we also include, I mean, we have like services in rural areas, but also in cities, and which is this is a different business case. I didn't go through that, but I think the on-demand ride pooling services, they have very different case by case. But yeah, we operate through all Japan, except the island of Shikoku, which for whatever reason we haven't operated there, but I'm looking forward to go one day.
Is there anyone more who has any question for Azarel? Okay, thank you again, Azarel. We'll continue.
Sorry, I can have a question.
Yes.
How do you finance the system, and is it only by the travelers paying for it, or are they subsidized?
So, as I say, we always try to bring as many different sources of revenue as possible. In Japanese Japanese transport companies, because they are private, they fully understood that it's very hard, if not impossible, to be profitable just with the fare box. So they always look about the ramifications of the system. So we do. It really depends. Normally, almost every project requires a certain degree of public funding. It can be direct funding, it can be indirect funding. There are different ways to do so. But in Japan, we tried, again, involve the private stakeholders. For instance, this case of Sapporo drugstore on the right, the finance is published. It's all public information, so you can find a look. It's heavily, so I think it's, speaking from memory, I think it's around half by the local government. But then the drugstore pays a big amount. I think it's 1/3 even more. The rest is the fare box. But the thing is that the important thing here is that the drugstore was the one doing this. The one started the project. So, for example, if they never did this, probably the local government was not able to finance it, right? We have fare box revenues, depends the area. For example, for urban areas, I have seen up to 60, 70% of fare box revenue. But normally, the rule of thumb here is the 3 rule. The 3 rule is 1/3 it's subsidies by the local government or the central government. 1/3 is the fare box revenue, and 1/3 are the transport companies. Transport companies, the public local companies. This is a rule of thumb, but it's not always the case. But again, the important thing is that for that finance, how you can involve extra revenues. For example, we are exploring commercials like advertisements within that kawaii framework. We have exploring, for example, the economic activities linkage, like in the case of Tohoku Mas in the right. The main source of revenue for the company is not the DRT service, but the high-speed rail, where they get the larger margins. But without this service, people will not use the high-speed rail because they will use their own cars, because they will not be able to be free in that area. So we always need to look for this cross-subsidization.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you again. And further questions? Then we, in the other case, we get over to the information I have to inform you about. So let's see. So I have right page up.
I have a question or a couple of questions. Michel Gabrielsson at the Swedish Transport Administration. Very interesting. What kind of vehicles are you using? Is it the ones you have shown on the pictures? And you were talking about collaboration with bus companies, taxi companies, and how do you approach these in order to collaborate? So these were my two questions. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So it really, again, goes case by case. For instance, in some cases, we use normal taxis. In some cases, we use volunteers vehicles. In some cases, we use these vans you are seeing right now. In some cases, we use buses. I think it's less about the vehicle and more about the modular thinking of the projects. As I say, it's much easier and much, it's better for everyone for all the stakeholders to think about what is available, right? So if we find that, for example, a new service is, for example, paid by a bus company, we know that they are probably going to provide the existing buses. There's no need to make new ones, right? But if we found, for example, a DRT service in rural area is going to be opposed by the local taxis, then we try to bring them in. And I think it's a trade-off. I mean, yes, the vehicle might not be for example, some taxis, they are not able to carry people in wheelchairs because they are not prepared for that. That's a very unfortunate. But for a first pilot, I think it's a good trade-off because then you can start doing things. I think also one of the things I was surprised, for example, so I used to go a lot to Linköping, and I love these shared taxis where they are like from the Gotland, which is like red and yellow. Actually, I like them quite a lot comparing. But I found that in many places that when they launch DRT services, when they launch on-demand vehicles, they use the vehicles, they need to be brand new, they need to be like perfectly done. And I think that's great. But again, perfection is the enemy of the good. So I think it's much better to use whatever is available and use the available resources because one is more efficient. Second, you can actually learn and you can modify things later on.
Okay, thank you very much.
So we'll end question time there, and let's go on with the further information. You can find this webinar in a couple of days at our YouTube channel, Svensk Kollektivtrafik. You search or you click at this link, or you can scan also the QR code here. And here is also the coming up webinars for the spring. So we have two webinars which not is clearly decided yet here. We also will have some webinars creating the new index for the service travels we have managed together with the other transportation associations, Svenska Taxiförbundet and Sveriges Bussföretag. And that have new information since Tuesday this week. So you can find about this index for service resor. How about the new index for the service travels procurements? And as I said before, it will also be in webinar together with the other parts of the bunch. And I also will get a heads up on the strategic public transport education, which K2, Helena, so who had the question before, is managing this course. And it's a 2 weeks internet course. Do you want to say something about this, Helena? You don't have the microphone.
It is a course we have given many years now, and it's often fully booked. So I guess that means that people find it very useful. So it's a broad course about public transport. So please have a look at it. Not only DRT and service transportation, but the whole public transport system.
And this course is for the whole public transport system. And the next one is about service travels and on-demand transports, DRTs. A broad course also for that we will perform for the second time next year. But we will give you a heads up so you can manage to ask in your organization and tip others to might sign for this course. So it will be held week 5 next year. And I want to also please ask you for answer this query about this webinar, so we can get some feedback also how we can perform better webinars. And also please mail me for some ideas for webinars if you want, if you have any. So Azarel, thank you very much again, and hope you will have a great visit still in Belgium. I heard you were in.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. I hope I can go back to Sweden soon. Thank you, and I think it's tack, but in Linköping they told me to say tack. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, and we end this webinar here now. Bye bye.